Tonight begins in the elegant, disciplined, and brutally unforgiving world of feudal Japan, a place of samurai honor, strict codes, and consequences kept sharp on purpose. It is the land of cherry blossoms and careful poetry, and of daily routines that would break most modern people before noon. He asks them to settle the room, lights low, a fan humming like a quiet stream, and to speak up in the comments about where they're listening from and what time it is there, because it always feels like this kind of story is best told at the edges of the day. The tone stays low, calm, and secretive. In that world, a person does not choose a path upon waking. The path chooses the person long before birth. A role is fixed by bloodlines and by ancestors who never stopped having opinions, even 6 generations after they died. A position in society isn't a suggestion. It is a sentence written in ink that never dries. Born to a household of warriors? Then the blade and the bow are yours, along with 1,000, and then 10,000, exacting ways to sit before a lord without insulting the room. Born a peasant. Then the mud keeps your ankles, and your children's ankles, in its quiet inventory for as many years as the weather allows. There are no resumes here, no sudden business ideas, no leap from market stall to throne room. There are samurai, peasants, artisans, merchants, and once placed, one stays placed. In this world, the ladder is not climbed, it is bowed to. He keeps his voice steady as he moves to the ones the village pretends not to see, the people who handle death, butchers, executioners, leather workers, important, always necessary, and treated like fog on a cold morning, present, useful, avoided. They do the work everyone depends on, and still the doors close when they pass. Even within classes, the rules tighten. A merchant with coin sits low on the order because making money without labor feels to the age like a moral bruise. Efficient? Yes. Respectable? No. Meanwhile, peasants are taxed so hard that paying honestly starves them, and hiding a little rice to live turns into treason. Punishment is public because fear educates. Samurai possess honor, but live under a ceiling that sits 1 inch above the head, close enough to feel, close enough to fear. They can anger a tailor or a sword, or a lord with a sneeze timed poorly. Women do not escape the net. In any household, a woman's freedom ends where her father's opinion begins, and the path offered is obedience, a marriage arranged, and perhaps, with luck, a little poetry taught in the spaces between chores. In this stage play, people are costumed at birth and pushed onto the boards, elegant, poetic, and inescapable, before anyone has eaten breakfast. The morning is cold. Not a pretty postcard cold, biting cold. Cleanliness is a devotion, almost a faith. He watches them wash at a stone basin where the water from a stream keeps its winter memory. No heat, no negotiation, just breath clouding the air, while fingers ache pink, and the shiver feels like old ancestors are making sure the body remembers humility. Soap, if it appears at all, is ash or rice bran with the strict personality of a monk. In some villages there is a bathhouse, and it becomes the heart, as much a place of gossip withheld as of steam. But privacy is a fantasy. Neighbors, in-laws, landlords all stand like pale trees, pretending this isn't awkward. First scrub, then soak. To muddy the water is to injure the village's skin. If there is no bathhouse, a person makes do. Salt on the teeth, twigs for brushes, nails neat, clothes aired out in cold sun. This is not fashion. It is morality. Dirt is a social sin. For warriors, the pressure doubles. A lord can decide to inspect a face or a hand at any hour. A speck under the nail is an insult to lineage. Wrinkles in the robe are disrespect. An odor at the wrong depth of the bow is a final mistake. Women are expected to smell like restraint and blossoms. Hair becomes architecture, pinned, oiled, and patient, so that a person can pound rice with dignity. Yes, it is very clean here. Clean like snow carved with a knife. He moves to the warrior class and lets the silence between his sentences be part of the story. The samurai life is not a parade of sword swings under trees. It is the avoidance of error. One code, call it the way of the warrior, stretches over every hour, and the code is strict enough to make the dead nervous. The warrior lives for his lord. The lord's words are weather. The warrior's task is loyalty so absolute that dying properly is preferable to disappointing mildly. Disobedience, dishonor, failure, dishonor, an unmeasured voice, dishonor, a sideways glance in a tea room, the same. And dishonor does not wash off. It is paid for in intestines, and everyone knows what that means without needing to say it. When disgrace comes, a blade and a quiet room arrive too, and a man who has practiced posture all his life is asked for one last terrible act of posture. Training never stops. Sword, bow, horse, strategy, calligraphy, verse. The body stands like a tower. The face wears the expression of someone who has traded joy for obligation and made peace with the exchange. Loud laughter is a sign of unfinished edges. Fear shown openly is decay. The sword is a mirror held to the soul. Spotless, or the reflection will lie about you. A blade raised in anger without cause can end a life's meaning. A lost duel can erase a name. Glory is rarely the point. Survival with dignity is. He takes them now to the mud where most live. A peasant wakes with the sun because hunger sets the clock, not because the sunrise is pretty. The hut's door is a curtain at best. Goats treat a sleeping mat as a path. Breakfast is a bowl if luck allows, river water if it doesn't. The fields look beautiful in paintings and documentaries. Up close they are pits that eat backs and time. Plant, weed, bend, repeat, and hope no bandits choose today. The hour of sunset does not rescue. It simply gives permission to limp. A missing ox? The headman wants a word. Grain shortfall? The headman wants two. Coin does not pay taxes. Rice does. Families eat the leftover if there is leftover. If the Lord's nephew rides his horse through a row, a season vanishes into apology. Complaints are a joke that no one laughs at. Talking back purchases exile or something quieter and more permanent. Become a village elder and people still ignore advice, but now they do it respectfully. The law pins the village's borders shut. Leaving without permission is not leaving, it is defecting. Festivals glimmer like small hearths in a winter of obligation. Weak sake circle dances, and for a day the body forgets the calendar. Then planting opens its hand again. He lets hunger lead to the table. Meals in this age are not indulgence but engineering. A peasant eats rice when rice is available and eats barley when barley agrees to pretend to be rice. A turnip visits, a radish hides in brine. Meat belongs to lords, or to that one unwanted chicken nobody asks after. Fish visits salted and sharp. Soup is a miso whisper with 2 leaves afloat like thin ideas. It is all sacred and quiet. It is also small and somehow always contains one crunchy mystery that the teeth argue about. Samurai fare is better on paper and colder in practice. They eat after the Lord eats and after whoever the Lord needs to impress eats, and the samurai must wear gratitude while the steam escapes. Seasons rule the pantry because there is no other master. Winter suggests fasting, the way a stern teacher suggests more homework. Stomach aches ask for remedies and receive ancestry and warm water. Theft is not a lesson. It is a spectacle of warning. Tea exists and sometimes becomes a ceremony that cares more about the soul's posture than the thirst of the throat. The script is precise. Turn the cup, bow at the correct hinge, drink in a silence that feels like snow. He sets down the spoon and picks up the danger of speech. Here, opinions are liabilities, not currency. A wrong joke is a loose roof tile. A correction offered to the wrong ears is a ladder kicked away. Within families, silence has seniority. A son does not step on a father's words. A wife does not repair a husband's logic in public. The Lord's decisions are not for discussion, unless someone has been secretly wanting a sword's opinion of their neck. Warriors are trained to make anger look like glass, present, invisible, sharp. Apologies become choreography so refined it might break the spine. Depths of bow, gifts with meanings, poems of shame, and a sincere hope not to be invited to a duel as a response. Sarcasm is a rotten roof beam. Sometimes it holds, sometimes it collapses without warning. The safest sentence is often the one that remains unspoken. Clothing speaks for people whether they ask it to or not. The high-born wear layered silk and sometimes armor that converses with the room. Deep indigo, earth browns, and a measured red that reminds everyone of what a sword can do when a person stops being careful. Two blades hang at the side, long and short, a portable declaration of authority. Drawing in public is a last resort. Wearing them wrong is a first mistake. Peasants wear cotton and humility, the colors of soil, smoke, and weather. Not minimalism, but budget and reality. Merchants dress well, then subtract until it becomes invisible wealth. The successful ones are experts in being just bright enough not to draw a bored warrior's eye. Craftsmen live between durability and neatness, avoiding any thread that would turn them into a spectacle. Women walk a narrower path, balancing grace, obedience, and 12-folded meanings stitched into a single kimono. Hair speaks a dialect. Patterns know the seasons. The wrong color at the wrong festival can bruise a household's pride and fuel a year of whispers. He leads them away from cherry blossoms and toward the quieter truth about love. This is not a land where passion easily survives. Marriage is a lever for alliances, status, the management of rice, and the careful avoidance of embarrassing the dead. A peasant's marriage is a matter arranged by elders who count teeth and stamina, not love letters. In warrior households, marriages seal pacts between families, the way wax seals a scroll. The goal is stability, not happiness. Stability that does not fall during harvest. If letters are written, they are written beautifully, folded like small altars, and passed by a maid who sees everything and says nothing. A daughter of a warrior learns calligraphy, etiquette, needlework, and the art of never demonstrating visible disappointment. Falling for a flute teacher is not permitted. Falling for anyone at all is unwise. Adultery can punish whole families, and the sword attends such matters too. Concubines exist, and existences multiply the number of people who can be disappointed silently. Love still happens, but it learns to disguise itself as friendship, duty, or distance. It prefers to haunt poems and plays where it can die prettily and trouble no one's taxes. He does not whisper when he talks about death. Death is not distant here. It is the neighbor who borrows sugar and never returns the cup. Warriors walk with 2 swords and a plan for leaving. Lose a battle, cut the belly. Insult honor, cut the belly. Spill a cup on the wrong sleeve. And if the wrong man is watching, prepare the room. The ceremony is artful and frightening, because the culture insists it be both. Peasants do not live on a longer timeline. A failed harvest teaches the language of famine. A tax unmet becomes a lesson the headman teaches the village with one man's head. Bandits move where maps are vague. Roads outside town are questions no one wants to answer. Many families decide that visiting cousins can wait a decade. Childbirth cuts a coin in the air and lets it fall to decide. Midwives help. Knives are rare. Prayers do more work than medicine. Some widows are expected to follow disgraced husbands by dagger, not by grief. Nature contributes earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and the kind of winter that teaches bones new definitions of cold. Volcanoes occasionally redraw maps like uninvited artists. There is no relief system. Hows rebuild themselves through hands and time. Hunger is dealt with by hunger and tight belts. The culture asks for calm acceptance at the end. A poem, a bow, a last look toward the clan, and a departure timed to seem polite. He explains that a person in this world is not a star alone, but a twig on a very old tree. The individual's truth is the clan's truth. The household name is a tunnel through which identity travels. Even warriors do not fight for themselves. They fight for a banner and the faces carved into memory behind them. A mistake embarrasses ancestors. A good death elevates the household and eases the sleep of the old. A boy might wish to cook noodles because he loves the heat and the steam and the mathematics of flavor. His clan raises horses, so his hands will learn hooves, not broth. A girl may paint well enough to turn walls into weather and silence into birds. Good. Her brush will decorate the temple her family sponsors according to rules stricter than gravity. Scandal travels like smoke through straw-roofed neighborhoods. One misstep can pull shame down through the branch that holds brothers and cousins and great uncles who suddenly must consider blades for balance. If a person survives the rules and the taxes and the duels that never happen but could, nature still tests the ribs. Typhoons roll in like gods with bad tempers and tear roofs into kites. Earthquakes begin like a thought and end with houses lying on their sides, dazed. Fire likes wood. This country is wood. Therefore, the logic is clear. Floods do what floods do, and droughts turn fields into cracked pottery. Winter is not a postcard. Winter is a negotiation with blankets and a brazier that dies too soon. The ring of fire makes sure that even the mountains can change their minds. There is no office to submit a claim to when the river decides to move. Taxes, however, do not move. They arrive on schedule. Power is a slope. At the bottom, a peasant reports to a headman, who reports to a swordsman, who reports to a lord, who obeys a stronger lord, who bows to a ruler who worries about cousins and poison and letters that get read by the wrong hands. Even the most dangerous men are someone else's middle management. A provincial lord looks untouchable until he doesn't, and then his castle is inspected and his scrolls are caught in other people's nets. The shogun is the strongest blade but sleeps poorly. The court has its own gravity and money has its own politics. The emperor wears sacred time like clothing and rules ceremonies more than men. His poetry may be better than his treasury. The tree does not invite climbing. It prunes those who try. Education draws the same lines. The sons of warriors learn to read and write, to stand with a bow and sit with a brush, to ride and to recite, and by 14 they can craft a death poem, while other boys in other worlds are still making friends with their handwriting. Merchant and artisan families teach numbers, records, the math of counting turnips by the wagon, useful learning with sharp edges but short horizons. Peasant children learn the hoe, the seed, the weather, and how to be small under the notice of men who who can change a family's season with a word. Scrolls exist mostly as rumors nailed to trees explaining tax increases. Girls mostly receive lessons in the art of silence and the maintenance of a house that must never reveal effort. If fortunate, they trace characters with a brush in the spare moments a day allows. Education is not a path upward. It is training for a station that has already been assigned. Beauty here is dangerous because it has rules. The curve of a fan, the angle of a tea bowl, the way a flower is persuaded to suggest a season instead of simply being one. Each is measured. A tea ceremony looks like peace and functions like a test. The guest sits at the correct depth of humility. The cup rotates just so. Gratitude is expressed in a tone that knows how far to bow without turning into theater. The margin for error is the width of a hair. Calligraphy appears gentle, but a brushstroke is a confession. Messy lines are accusations against the soul. Poetry is safer than politics and still manages to draw blood. Too personal is vulgar. Too dry is cold spirit. Too clever is a kind of theft. Culture is not relaxation. It is proof of refinement, of discipline, of belonging. After all this, he admits a simple truth. Most modern people would not last a day here. Not from weakness, but because the world was not designed for comfort. It was engineered for obedience, so tight it could sing. Every hour is a test. Posture, loyalty, the correct depth of a bow while speaking a seasonal greeting in a voice that contains only the right weather. Failing brings shame at the gentle end, and ritual at the severe end. There are no days off from being the version of yourself the clan requires. The beauty is real, and it has edges. The architecture, the rituals, the poetry, they are precise, alive, and made to endure. A single careless laugh, a foot over a threshold leading with the wrong side, a question asked because curiosity forgot the rules. These are small mistakes here, and small mistakes sometimes have final answers. He lets the paper door close softly on Japan and opens another on an older sea, where a queen commands ships in an age when women are forbidden to command anything. For names, he does not say the names readers expect. He calls her Maris, born by a coastal city that owes fealty to a vast empire, and the king she advises he calls Sirach, a ruler whose armies run from desert to river to mountain and back again. The chronicler who watches her with a blend of awe and suspicion he names Heron, a son of the same city she once ruled. The places remain, and the deeds remain. Only the labels change, the better to let the story move without echoes that distract. Maris inherits power not by request, but by refusal to release it. After her husband's death, she claims the throne and refuses the quiet. When Sirach gathers a sea of ships to humble a rival world, she brings 5 vessels of her own, sleek, quick, and mean, and sails them herself. At councils crowded with generals wearing iron like argument, she speaks the one language kings rarely hear, necessary truth. She warns him not to trap a great fleet in narrow water, where smaller, nimbler enemies can turn the sea into a knife. He ignores her because numbers intoxicate, and the price of that intoxication is paid in splintered hulls and shouting men. In the chaos, she does something that scholars still grind their teeth over. Pursued, she rams a friendly ship. The hunters, confused, release her. She slips out of the trap untouched. From a hill, Sirach watches and says a sentence that will outlive him. Men behaving like women, women behaving like men. And in his mouth, it is the highest praise he knows how to give. The decision is brutal, brilliant, and correct. She lives, and in living proves again that counsel is a form of courage. The defeat at sea sours the campaign. Serac asks for advice not as theatre, but as a man stripped of certainty. Maris tells him to go home, leave the land war to another. Burned cities are enough victory for now. He listens. Trust is a rare coin. He spends it on her. He entrusts heirs to her guardianship, and in that gesture the court reveals who it truly respects. Heron, the chronicler, writes her like a puzzle that never stops changing shape. To some she is traitor to blood. To others she is the most loyal servant a king ever had, because she serves not vanity, but survival. Her story refuses to harden. Later centuries will take her face and paint it as demon or damsel, because stories are often unfair to women who do not apologize for competence. The truth is plain. She ruled well, fought sharply, told a king the one thing kings are taught not to hear, and was right often enough that her enemies had to compliment her to make their own accounts believable. Another queen appears a century later, a namesake, call her Maris of Stone, who builds a tomb so grand the language invents a new word to describe it. The line between the two women blurs across time, and the city they both made famous becomes a lighthouse for the idea that power sometimes wears a woman's face and dares history to complain about it. He turns their eyes upward then, to older knights and older instruments. Before glass learned to magnify starlight, people used stone, shadow, and the ache in their necks from looking too long. The sky became a calendar, a compass, a god written in moving dots. He takes them along fields of standing stones that trap solstices in light, across deserts where a single star's return predicts a river's flood, through cities where pyramids find the cardinal directions with a stubbornness that embarrasses modern tools. In temples, priests and mathematicians share work without deciding who owns which task. On towers, they write down when a bright wanderer rises and falls, and from these notes, the first universal language begins to form. Numbers telling time. He does not change what is known. In one valley, a star, call it the dog, reappears at dawn, and the river soon follows. So kings declare calendars, and farmers plant, like clockmakers. In another land, scribes record the rhythm of an eclipse cycle, 18 years and some days, and kingdoms mistake calculation for prophecy and are glad to do so. Somewhere else, a book of numbers learns how to track a planet that loves to disappear and return on a schedule that feels like destiny. In far mountains, massive stone instruments read declinations the way careful hands read Braille. Across the ocean, a spiral of temples turns shadows into snakes on equinox evenings, so a crowd can watch the sky draw a story on steps. The naming changes on his tongue. To keep the tale uncluttered, the facts remain. Civilizations speaking different languages and believing different gods agree on one thing: the heavens move with a seriousness that deserves attention. By the time glass finally teaches eyes to cheat, the hard work has already been done. Tables written, cycles recognized, years tamed into calendars that still live on kitchen walls. Farmers, sailors, priests, rulers, everyone depends on those who watch and write. The sky is not background. It is law. He turns next to a young republic staring at maps, the way hungry men stare at bread. He keeps the names of the living nations as they were, but when he reaches the men in palaces, he lets the labels shift for quiet. A deal is offered by an emperor who needs money and fewer worries. A president who prefers rules over improvisation breaks his own pattern and calls the purchase a treaty because the treaty clause allows him to be bold without changing the book. The price is low, the land is large, the newspapers celebrate, and the people whose homes already cover the land are not consulted. The expeditions that follow, boats up rivers, lists of plants and animals, mountains mapped by tired hands, turn mystery into inventory. The dream of a water road to the Western Ocean dissolves under boots and oars, but the journals return heavy with future. What begins as a purchase becomes a pressure. Treaties multiply, promises divide, lines appear on paper where trails once ran like soft pencil through grass. Forts are built. Roads follow. The frontier behaves like a tide that forgot how to go out. The system decides land must be owned to be real. Nations that have lived there for centuries are told to move away from what cannot be moved. Some are asked. Many are told. Some are carried off by the kinds of sickness that travel with blankets and boats. The question of labor, enslaved or free, adds heat to every congressional room until the rooms catch fire. A compromise draws an imaginary line across a map and pretends lines can solve the kinds of problems that grow roots. Rivers are redirected. Herds vanish under rifles and contracts. Fields replace grass that once knew how to burn without dying. The cost of the bargain expands beyond coins, measured instead in languages softened into silence, in names that survive only on maps, and in a grief that teaches children how to speak softly in museums. And yet, the purchase alters the country's posture forever. A coastal republic becomes a continental one. Confidence becomes policy. Policy becomes an appetite that eats all the way to another ocean and then stares at the next horizon as if horizons are invitations. Commerce blooms along river arteries. Cities rise where two currents meet and shake hands. Mines open. Rails thread the ground. Wheat takes the place of wind for seasons at a time. The story becomes two stories at once, growth and grief, and the country learns how to tell only one of them at public celebrations. He does not lecture. He keeps the tone low and steady, mysterious, as if everything he is saying is something the night already knew and is now allowing to be spoken aloud. The thread that ties it all, Japan's strict mournings, the queen at sea who refused to apologize for being correct, the temples that taught stone to count, the purchase that changed a nation's shape and cost other nations their homes, is endurance. Systems designed to endure, people who endure anyway, maps that endure long enough to be redrawn. He pauses there, precisely where the tail wants to inhale before the next long stretch. He lets the silence settle a moment, because silence is part of the telling. Then he continues, moving through centuries like stepping across stones in a dark river. The Louisiana Purchase was ink on parchment, but on the ground it was boots in mud, axes in trees, wagons that creaked like old bones, and fires that ate forests to make way for farms. The ink dried in Paris, but the sound of it drying reached across prairies, valleys, and mountains. For the young republic, it was triumph. For the nations already living there, it was the sound of erasure beginning. Those nations were not nameless shadows. They were families with languages older than the flag that now claimed their land. They were alliances, traders, story keepers, hunters who knew the bison's path like their own pulse. The map makers in Washington did not know their rivers or their mountains, but still drew lines across them, as if paper could master earth. Jefferson, the man who dreamed of an agrarian republic of farmers, saw the purchase as a garden of destiny. But his dream was also a nightmare for others. Letters he wrote in private betrayed his true plan. Native nations could either adopt American ways, surrender their lands gradually, or face removal. He spoke of it politely, but beneath the words was the same blade that hung over peasants in feudal Japan, the blade of inevitability. The explorers he sent west, men like Lewis and Clark, saw themselves as discoverers, but they did not discover. They recorded, they named, they mapped, and with every mapped river came a promise that settlers would follow. Their journals listed plants, animals, weather, and people. They admired, they traded, they relied on guides like the young Shoshone woman with her child strapped to her back. She made peace where men carried rifles. Without her, the expedition would likely have ended as bones on a trail. But journals turn into blueprints, and blueprints turn into settlements. Soon forts dotted the rivers, and soldiers claimed they were there for order. Roads cut through forests, and the forests were never the same. Buffalo herds, once so vast the ground shook beneath them, began to vanish under rifle fire and greed. The prairies that had carried stories for centuries became rectangles of farmland, parceled and sold. The government wrote treaties in ink that faded fast, agreements signed under pressure in languages not native to the people signing them, with promises that dissolved like smoke. For each treaty broken, another was written, as if words could mask the weight of betrayal. Step by step, the frontier advanced. Families uprooted, nations forced westward again and again, until the horizon itself seemed to retreat. But the purchase did not only test the relationship between the Republic and the First Nations of the land. It also tested the Republic itself. The question of slavery spread into the new territory like fire in dry grass. Southern planters looked west and saw cotton. Northern voices looked west and saw opportunity strangled by chains. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 tried to draw a line across the new land, a line meant to keep the peace. South of the line, slavery could spread. North of it, it could not. But lines on maps rarely hold when greed and ideology pull at them from both sides. That compromise was only a pause, not a solution. The wound deepened, festering into the Civil War. In the meantime, the Mississippi River carried dreams. Flatboats piled high with goods floated south to New Orleans, where merchants and traders from a dozen nations mingled in the humid air. The river was a spine holding the nation upright. Cities like St. Louis grew from small posts to busy crossroads where languages, cultures, and ambitions collided. From there, trails radiated westward, each step a gamble against weather, bandits, and hunger. Jefferson had imagined farmers scattered across the land, independent, self-reliant, virtuous. But the reality was messier. Speculators bought vast tracts of land and sold them piecemeal at profit. Railroads, when they came, carved steel across plains and mountains, binding the land not to Jefferson's dream of yeoman farmers, but to an industrial machine hungry for coal, steel, and expansion. The purchase doubled the size of the nation, but it also doubled its contradictions. It was both promise and peril, opportunity and oppression, growth and grief. For every settler who found a future in the new land, another family lost their past. For every city that rose, a language fell silent. For every acre tilled, a herd disappeared. And yet, the Republic pressed forward, because that is what republics do when ambition is stronger than reflection. The people celebrated the purchase as destiny, a sign that the continent itself had chosen them. But the land had not chosen. The land had endured. The rivers flowed, the mountains stood, the prairies stretched, long before any flag planted itself in their soil. Generations later, people still drive across highways that trace those old trails. They cross bridges over the same rivers. They live in cities born from forts and posts built during the push west. The purchase is not just history. It is the ground beneath millions of lives. And yet the ghosts remain. Ghosts of treaties broken, languages silenced, nations scattered. The mysterious part of it all is how a single signature in Paris could ripple so far, so long. How a decision made by Napoleon for war money and by Jefferson for river access could reshape a continent and alter destinies not yet born. The men who signed the papers did not know the full cost. Perhaps they did not care. But history remembers in ways signatures do not. He pauses again, as if to let the echo of that decision drift through the centuries. And then he whispers that this is only half the story, because the purchase was not just land gained, it was lives reordered. It was a seed planted in soil that would grow into railroads, into wars, into skyscrapers, into highways, into the very idea of America as a continental power. The ink has dried, the maps are drawn, but the questions linger. What was truly bought that day, and what was taken without asking? He leans back into the story, not rushing, letting the weight of it gather in the room. The tale is too large to tell quickly. The Louisiana Purchase was not a single event. It was a fuse, long and slow burning, lit in Paris and burning across the prairies for generations. Every year that followed was part of its unfolding, and each year the land whispered different truths to different people. To settlers, the plains looked infinite, grass that seemed to stretch forever, rivers that shimmered like silver veins. The soil promised wheat, corn, and cotton. The promise was intoxicating. Families loaded wagons, leaving behind crowded towns and thin hopes in the east to chase the dream of space and freedom. They painted wagons with Bible verses and carved children's names into wood, as if writing them into the landscape itself. But to the native nations, the same plains were already maps of memory. Every river bend carried stories, every hill carried ancestors, every herd of bison carried food and clothing and tools. When settlers arrived with their fences and their surveys, it was as though someone had taken shears to a tapestry and begun cutting it into squares. The clash was inevitable. At first, treaties were written, ceremonies with speeches, gifts, promises. But treaties are fragile things when written by men who do not intend to keep them. The ink dried, the words faded, and the settlers kept coming. By the time the treaties were broken, the people who signed them were already buried, and their children were left to bear the betrayal. He tells of one family, faceless in the record, but vivid in imagination. They lived by a river in what is now Missouri. Their lodge stood near the water, their lives woven into the seasons, planting corn, hunting deer, fishing with nets that caught more than food, caught continuity. Then came surveyors with maps. The family's land was marked in neat squares, numbered and priced. To the surveyors, it was progress. To the family, it was the end of a world. They moved west, following kin who had been pushed before them, leaving behind graves they would never again tend. For the settlers, hardship came too. The land was not empty, nor was it gentle. Wagons broke, winter storms rolled over the plains with an indifference that felt personal. Locusts stripped fields bare in hours, children sickened. Many never reached the farms they dreamed of, but the difference was this: when settlers lost, they tried again. When native families lost, they were told not to return. As the purchase matured into states, Louisiana, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, the contradictions grew sharper. New states meant new arguments in Congress, slave or free. Each admission of land was a battle in the greater war for the nation's soul. Politicians drew lines on maps as if morality could be divided by latitude. The Missouri Compromise was one such line, a fragile bandage on a wound that would not stop bleeding. For every farm that flourished, another moral compromise was demanded. He reminds them of Napoleon's laughter, faint but still echoing across the ocean. To him, Louisiana was expendable, a pawn sacrificed in a greater game against Britain. He sold it not out of generosity, but calculation. He thought the United States, fattened on new land, would one day humble England. In a sense, he was right. But the price was not just coins in a treasury. The price was people. Jefferson, the president who prided himself on principle, knew this. His private letters reveal a man who understood he was stretching the Constitution thin, perhaps too thin. He consoled himself by calling it a treaty, by telling himself the ends justified the means. But history is unkind to rationalizations. His dream of a republic of farmers was built on land already occupied, already lived in, already sacred. He could not see the contradiction clearly, or perhaps he chose not to. And then there were the explorers, the ones sent to make the mystery real. Lewis and Clark wrote of new plants and animals, sketched mountains, recorded rivers. They were meticulous, scientific, but their journals were also letters of invitation. Each entry whispered to the East, "Come here, take this, it is rich." Their discoveries were not discoveries at all, but introductions that would cost the hosts everything. As settlers pushed westward, railroads followed. Iron rails cut across prairies, linking rivers to ports, towns to cities. The whistle of locomotives became the new sound of destiny. But with every mile of track, the bison herds shrank. Hunters shot them not for food but for profit, leaving carcasses rotting on the plains. Once, herds so vast they darkened the horizon, moved across the land. Within decades, they were nearly gone. The people who depended on them were left hungry, their way of life collapsing with the herds. The land itself changed. Rivers were dammed, grasslands plowed into fields of wheat, forests cut for timber. What had been managed carefully by fire and tradition became an industrial engine. Progress was the word used. Extraction was the truth. And still, the nation celebrated. School children memorized the story of Jefferson's great bargain. Textbooks praised the courage of explorers, the grit of pioneers. Rarely did they mention the people who were displaced, or the promises broken, or the graves left untended. The purchase became a myth, polished until it shone, its darker edges hidden in shadow. But shadows remain no matter how carefully hidden. Tribes forced west carried stories of betrayal that echoed through generations. The songs changed, the dances shifted, the languages bent, but did not break. Even now, reservations stand as living reminders of the cost of expansion. The United States doubled its land, but it halved its conscience. He pauses, letting that hang, before drawing them back to the present. Because this story is not locked in the past. Drive across Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and you cross the land of the purchase. The highways run where buffalo once stampeded. The towns stand where villages once sang. The rivers still flow, carrying with them both memory and forgetting. The purchase is not gone. It is underfoot. It is in the soil that grows wheat, in the oil fields that fuel engines, in the rivers that turn turbines. It is in the debates about land rights, about sovereignty, about who truly owns the earth beneath their feet. The purchase did not end in 1803. It is still unfolding. And that is the mystery of history. It never ends where the textbooks place their periods. It lingers. It seeps. It waits for us to notice. He speaks again, slower this time, as though walking the listeners through a field at dusk, where each step could stir a memory. The Louisiana Purchase was called a bargain, a triumph, a masterstroke of diplomacy. But to stand on the ground itself, centuries later, is to feel the layers of stories pressed into the soil. Every acre has at least two voices, one telling of opportunity, one telling of loss. Settlers carried the dream of independence, but they also carried axes, plows, and rifles. With every farm carved out of the wilderness itself shrank. Prairie grasses that had held roots for centuries were overturned, replaced with neat rows of corn and wheat. Rivers were redirected to feed the fields. Swamps were drained. Forests were felled. Each change was called progress, but progress to one people was displacement to another. Imagine a trading path once used by native families for generations, a trail that led from river to hunting grounds, lined with the echoes of laughter and footsteps. Within a few decades, that same path was widened, graded, and transformed into a wagon road. Later, it became a railway, then an interstate highway. Cars speed over it now, their drivers unaware that beneath the asphalt lies the memory of moccasins, the memory of buffalo hooves, the memory of a people told to move further west. The Purchase created wealth for many, but not all. Land speculators grew rich. Merchants in St. Louis, New Orleans, and beyond saw fortunes rise as goods flowed more freely along the Mississippi. Farmers gained new fields to pass on to their sons, but enslaved men and women were marched into the new territory in chains, forced to plant cotton and sugar for the profit of others. For them, the Purchase was not opportunity. It was expansion of bondage. As states formed, Congress fought over each one. Would it be slave or free? Missouri's entry nearly split the young republic in two. Each new star on the flag became a contest, a gamble, a wound. The land doubled, but so did division. The line across the map that was supposed to keep peace only hardened the differences. The Purchase was a seed, and from it grew both prosperity and civil war. And always the land bore witness. The Mississippi rolled on, carrying barges heavy with grain and cotton. The prairies stretched endless, hiding storms that could flatten a wagon train in an afternoon. The Rockies loomed like a wall of stone, daring explorers to find a passage. Nature was both gift and gauntlet. Lewis and Clark's journals read like hymns to wonder. They wrote of mountains never seen before, rivers so wide they seemed like seas, animals unknown to the east, grizzly bears, pronghorns, prairie dogs. They marveled, they measured, they drew. But every page of awe was also a roadmap for future settlement, future conquest. Wonder became inventory. Inventory became possession. He asks them to imagine those explorers reaching the Pacific after years of hardship, frozen winters, hunger, endless trudging, and at last seeing the ocean stretching gray under a storm. To them, it was triumph. To the native people who had guided them there, it was another step in a story of intrusion. The ocean was no discovery. It had always been there. Time moved on. Railroads stitched the territory together. Telegraph wires carried words faster than rivers could carry boats. Towns grew into cities. The Purchase became not wilderness but homeland for millions of new Americans. Yet the price was written in other ink, the ink of removal orders, of forced marches, of broken treaties. The trail of tears did not pass entirely through the purchase, but its shadow fell there too. Nations removed from the east were pushed into lands carved from the purchase, only to be pushed again when settlers wanted more. It was displacement, layered upon displacement, grief upon grief. And still the purchase was celebrated. School children drew maps, tracing the outline of the land bought from France. Teachers called it destiny. Politicians called it proof of America's greatness. Rarely did anyone mention the graves left behind, the languages silenced, the songs that faded into whispers. He lets the listeners sit with that contradiction, because history is never simple. It is a rope woven of triumph and tragedy, and to pull on one strand is to feel the others tighten. Today, the purchase still shapes lives. The wheat fields of Kansas feed millions. The oil fields of Oklahoma fuel engines across the world. The cattle ranches of Texas stretch across plains once black with buffalo. The cities Denver, St. Louis, New Orleans stand as monuments to growth, but beneath them are older monuments, invisible, made of memory and loss. The mysterious part is how the purchase continues to echo. Drive a highway in Nebraska, and you may not know you are following an old migration route. Walk through New Orleans, and you may not know that its importance to Jefferson was the spark that made the deal possible. Hike in Montana, and you may not know you are on a path once walked by an expedition that changed the map forever. Every acre of that land is still speaking. Some voices are loud, tractors, trains, airplanes. Some voices are quiet, whispers of treaties, songs sung in languages fewer and fewer still speak. The purchase is both victory and wound. It is pride and regret. It is a story America still tells, but not always honestly. And perhaps that is the most mysterious thing of all, that the land itself remembers, even when people try to forget. He carries the story forward like a lantern in the dark, showing how the light falls differently depending on where you stand. The Louisiana Purchase was always two things at once, a promise and a warning. For settlers, it promised endless land. For native nations, it warned of endless intrusion. Both visions came true. Settlers told themselves the land was empty, waiting, theirs for the taking. But emptiness is often just blindness. The prairies were not silent. They held voices, songs, prayers. The rivers were not nameless. They carried the weight of stories older than any constitution. To claim that buying land from France made it American was to mistake a transaction for truth. Still, the transaction carried power. Jefferson's pen stroke doubled the nation's size, and the nation never forgot the thrill of that expansion. It was as if the young republic had swallowed a continent in one bite. From then on, expansion became a habit, a hunger. Florida, Texas, Oregon, California, Alaska, Hawaii. Each acquisition echoed the first. Each carried the same mixture of triumph and cost. The Louisiana Purchase had set the precedent. Land could be bought, treaties could be bent, borders could be stretched like canvas. But the story of the Purchase isn't only about land. It's about identity. Before 1803, the United States was a coastal nation hugging the Atlantic, wary of European powers at its borders. After 1803, it was a continental power, restless, ambitious, staring west with hungry eyes. The Purchase turned America from a fragile experiment into an empire in the making. He tells of the farmers who crossed into the new territory, carrying seeds, tools, and hope. They saw rich soil and believed it meant destiny. They built cabins, planted fields, raised children. Their descendants still live on that land, still farm the same fields. To them, the Purchase was a gift from history. Then he tells of the native families, forced to leave their villages, their burial grounds, their hunting grounds. They walked west under guard, carrying what they could, leaving behind what they couldn't. Some never survived the journey. Their descendants still live too, on reservations carved from the edges of that same purchase. To them, it was not destiny. It was theft. Both stories are true. Both live in the soil. The purchase also carried a strange irony. Jefferson, who believed in small government and strict constitutional limits, stretched the Constitution to make the deal. He justified it as a treaty, though he knew it was more. His critics called him a hypocrite. His supporters called him a visionary. History calls him both. In bending his own rules, Jefferson set a pattern America would follow again and again, justifying expansion by whatever legal language was convenient. And what of Napoleon, the seller? To him, the land was a burden. He needed gold for wars, not grasslands across the ocean. He sold Louisiana the way a gambler sells heirlooms, to fund the next game. He thought he was cutting his losses. He had no idea he was shaping another nation's destiny. His name remains in history, but the land he sold remains more powerful than any of his battles. As decades passed, the purchase became memory, then myth. School children recited it as proof of greatness. Politicians invoked it as justification for more expansion. It was told as a clean bargain, a story of smart diplomacy. But the untold half of the story always lingered in the margins. The displacement, the broken treaties, the contradictions over slavery. The wilderness turned into commodity. He pauses, then says softly, "History has two faces. One looks forward, proud of progress. The other looks back, haunted by cost. The Louisiana Purchase is both faces at once. Today, drive across the plains and you'll see endless wheat fields, grain silos, oil pumps nodding in the distance. Fly over at night and you'll see towns glowing like constellations. All of it grew from that bargain in 1803, and yet, if you listen closely, you can still hear the older constellations, the buffalo, the native trails, the rivers that carried canoes long before steamboats. The land remembers. That is the mystery. That is the truth. And in remembering, it asks a question. What is the real cost of expansion? Is it measured in dollars? Or in lives? In acres gained? Or in stories lost? The Louisiana Purchase cannot answer. It can only stand as a mirror. One nation sees triumph, another sees tragedy. Both are right. The ink dried in Paris, but the echo still rolls across the plains.